So in this video we are going through this shot from my short film Fishing. This will be more of a general overview of the project, and I'm doing this with a good friend of mine because talking to yourself in front of a microphone isn't that comfortable. Keep in mind that we're both foreigners to the English language, so please excuse us our ununderstandable gibberish. And he is going to ask some questions and hopefully fill in all of these silences.
Yeah, I hope I will do so. So, Andreas, can you tell me how old you were when you created this massive...
I was...
massive
when I
notary?
created this fucking notary, I was 16.
16 years old, okay. How long did it take to find out what is really important to get into first in compositing? What was the first thing you...
Well, I always started with keying, and this is I'm actually quite surprised at how good the key was for 8-bit GH4 footage. Normally it takes a lot of masks and all this kind of stuff to get a good keying, but it's actually that simple. These are all the things I needed for keying.
With what camera do you capture it?
With a Panasonic GH4.
GH4. Okay, and the keying is very easy, I see. It was not that hard like
yes, I did use two keys. One here for a little bit softer one, because for all the motion blur when she does a lot of quick movements, because you can see like stuff here around her hands. And I masked out all these parts where things are moving quickly and there's a lot of motion blur. I mixed between these two keys so I could get this motion blur to work. Yeah, you know, here you can see when I turn it off and when I turn it on. Yes, exactly. And I always put the...
It's a little detail, but it's it's very efficient at the end.
When you use the delta key in Fusion, it kind of it does this weird thing. It creates this noise and it's really weird. So what I always do is use that as a mask again for the original footage. So I just copy the original footage.
Because you get rid of that artifacts. And
yeah, exactly. Because when you use this key here and put it back again as a mask for this one, you can see that it just gets rid of all of this.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly, this is what I did here. And after that I do put a D-spill on that. So after that I would just export this as a video file with alpha transparency and put this one inside of Blender. So let me find the Blender file for this one. Open file location.
So I believe the pre-work for this shot was massive. It's much work for you to do before you get this shot in pre-work, before you go to post-processing, and you have to done the lighting and the camera settings, and everything has to match, and you have to use trackers in the background and everything and so on. How long did the shot take to be prepared?
I can't exactly say how long it took, because I basically started to build the green screen studio for 2 to 3 hours, and then I went back inside. I built this thing inside our barn on our farm. Barn on a farm, so right. And I'm gonna tell you this, it's the wackiest green screen studio you're probably going to see ever. Here's an example of what it looked like.
Yeah.
I mean,
the behind the scenes, this is really, really weird.
That's shitty rigs. I mean, 50% of the set was made out of cardboard.
Yeah, it was very cheap props at the set.
See that? I
But
didn't
it worked. It worked. Yeah.
See that blue light on the left side here? It wasn't even. I didn't even bother to buy a light gel to color the light. I cut out a garbage bag and taped that on this ring light.
Okay. Yeah, but the final shot that can you show that again? To compare the two. The final shot and the green screen footage.
Yeah, this is what it then
finally
looked like.
That's crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah.
Like she's really in that world.
Yeah, I had a few previous version before that. This was a previous version for it. It was basically done, but after looking back at it after 2 weeks or something like that, I thought it looked kind of shitty, and I redid this whole environment again. Yeah, and I always put these cardboards with separate tracking markers here in front, because Blender kind of messes up the tracking if there isn't any parallax. So if I would just track these points behind there, they're all on a flat surface. The tracking wouldn't just not work. Yeah, exactly. You can see this is what the track looked like. I got a soft error of 0.35, which was pretty good, I think. But the track was still not very. I can show you here what I did when I put this. Let me open the scene. Add a new camera and add this camera solver to it, and let's hit soft camera motion. You can see that
you got these little empty objects.
You can see that it really starts jittering still, even if I got a soft error of 3.5. And that messed up all the things. So what I did just at the end, I converted this constraint to a F-curve, and that gave me a bunch of keyframes. So what I would do is just go through here and just delete all of these keyframes between, so Blender would interpolate this motion between them, and that's the way I got rid of this jittering effect here, and got somewhat of a clean camera motion. Here you can see which keyframes I left. The keyframes at the beginning were fine, they weren't that jittery. So yeah, this was what the blend scene looked like. Let's I created these scenes before I even started to shoot. And then I could just put a 3D dummy in these 3D scenes and plan out the lighting with the lights I really had. So I had like 2 LED light panels and 1 ring light, and I just used area lights in the blend scene to kind of look how the shot was going to end up. And how what my possibilities were with these lights.
Do you even use sketchbooks or something like that to that you use for your shots before you work on them in CGI or on
no,
PC?
actually not. I just start working on them in 3D. I think I can find one of these. I did a few storyboards. Here's one of the storyboards I used. For the last scene.
So okay.
And this is the animation style where I discovered, hey, I can make a whole short film in this kind of thing, and that's when Disconnected Head was created.
Yeah. Because you had to choose where to set the camera angle, and because when you make the set in the barn, you had to
pre-visualize it.
Yeah, pre-visualize it. So do you keep everything you want to visualize in mind, or are there many Blender files you didn't even open up when you got another idea for the shot, or you overthink something and think, okay, that shot is messed up, I use another one? And
yeah, actually, yes, I have a few scenes that I never used. Like, yeah, I have these folders where there are these progress folders, and I had this whole scene here in the forest. After she got out of this hallway made of this bookshelf, actually planned on she ending up in this kind of forest and then coming to the cliff, but I ended up not using it because the forest scene was completely unnecessary. And yeah, exactly, this was the cliff behind there. So this was a whole scene I never used. Let's go back to this shot here. So after I keyed this in Davinci Resolve and exported it, I brought it in as a plane, and yeah, I did this whole Ian Hubert method and brought it in as a plane so I could start doing some lighting. Now can in real time adjust the light so the background would match this footage here.
Okay.
And I put in some additional lights. This is what the scene looks like with only these lights up here.
Yeah, cool, I understand.
And now if I turn on all the additional lights I put in here, this is what it looks like, and it's a lot brighter. And yeah, I added in front of here a area light that would give some more light to this tentacle that is coming out of this wall here. And I added
that's very cool.
add a spotlight behind her, so I would get some more realistic lighting up from there. These bookshelves were actually pretty simple, so I modeled these, just use these textures and put them on these cubes.
Okay. So this is no model from SketchUp or something like that, it's all self-made projection.
Yeah, once in a while I do something myself.
Very cool. Do you have any tips for filmmakers or 3D artists to improve lighting in a scene like that where light seems to be captured in just little spots around her and everything in the back is dark? And how do you get this realistic look for the bookshelf around her, and how do you set the lighting?
Well, it's you always have to keep your real set in mind and your real lights, and always work together with them. So I didn't, when I did the lighting for these 3D scenes, I didn't just light them as if I would do a final 3D render. I always just used the lights I knew I had available for the real set. In 3D I could add like 300 area lamps, and in reality I only had 2, so I only used like 2 or 3 lamps really in the 3D scene, so it would match. And it also is a good way to pre-visualize the lighting and just do the lighting before you even get on set, because we have cycles, and cycles is it's basically a stair for simulating light, and you can even could use this technique for planning lighting for a real shoot without any visual effects elements in them. This behind there isn't even a real model here. You can see that this here is just a stretched out cube. Yeah, exactly, to keep the render time low. If you isolate this object here, you can see that this is basically projection mapping.
It's
I did a render of this hallway and then projected it back onto a cube because render times.
Nice.
You can see that yeah, exactly. And I projected this onto this cube, and yeah, it would save a lot of render time and make the scene a lot lighter than having a infinitely long funnel that was all made out of these objects that the polygon count would have been through the roof if I would have done this. Yes.
What is this the sphere for?
It's for as a rigid body passive objects to push out or to make these wood sparks here basically explode and fly through here. So this is a rigid body simulation. These scattered wood particles here.
It simulates in the bookshelf.
Yes, exactly. And since we cannot, it's outside of the camera view, we don't need to really destroy this pole. So these books here, there's also something interesting about these book assets. Yeah, what I basically did, I did these book simulations as a rigid body in a different scene, and then exported all of these book simulations as a Alembic file, so that I didn't have to simulate them every time I wanted a exploding bookshelf in this short film. So basically what this allowed me to do is when I had another Blender scene, just go to import a Alembic file, and then I just imported this book simulation here, and then I just had this in my scene. This one is one of the slow motion ones.
Okay.
And cool. I could just put them wherever I wanted. And since the hallway is always the same width, I could just use these assets over and over again without having to simulate all of the stuff every time I use this in my scene.
Okay.
And so that's why there isn't any actual simulation for these bugs, and they're all keyframes here. What I basically did is I didn't, because I wanted the character was in between here, and we just rendered it all at as one single image. Is how could we compositor in the depth of the image. So I basically just rendered everything as a separate path. So let's go to my render folder here. You can see here that I exported a single layer just for the background books.
Oh, okay.
And
they get layered after.
Yeah, exactly. So I could layer them up again in compositing.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there is a separate layer for the background tentacle.
Can we see the project in Davinci Resolve? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. It's this node tree here is basically all the background. So from top here to here, and let's go through this fusion composition. So this was the background render, and the first thing I did was convert it to a sRGB color space with a gamut effect here, which brought it back to sRGB, which is actually not the way I would do this now. So what I would do today instead, I would use one of my EXR LUTs to convert this back, because they are using the filmic color space from Blender. You can just open the LUT folder. And EXR LUTs, linear EXR to Rec 7 online. This would be the correct way to do this. You can see that what difference these two make.
Yeah.
This is what the correct way would be, and you can see a little bit on the highlights and everything that this is just converting EXR to Rec 7 online without keeping the filmic Blender color space in mind. So
cool.
Yeah, but this is the way I did it back then, because I didn't know it any better. And then I put a dust layer on top of this one. Yeah, I created these dust layers from this blood mist pack here, and then just inverted color, did some color correction, and dragged it onto the background, and then I placed it here because I wanted dust behind the tentacle and a layer of dust before it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's here I put the tentacle layer. I also did some little bit of color correction on this one and put it on top of this dust. And then I put the books in front of that, also layered that on top. I had to do some little bit of more complex stuff
To hide
here
the,
because I had this mist pass and rendered in separate passes, which meant that the books and the tentacle wasn't in the mist pass actually. So I had to mask these things back onto the mist pass, which I won't go too deep into this. But yeah, I layered these books then on top of this one, and then I used another mist and used this as a mask for a curve, RGB curves to lift up the highlights and add this green mist in the scene. You could also do this by do it in Blender itself.
I think it's some interesting perspective because the bookshelves they lead us to the center of the scene and the center of the picture.
Yeah, I mean all lines in the composition of the shot lead into the character, which is always kind of nice when using tunnel locations for shooting. You could get the same effect with just a cube and putting a emission shader in the volume here.
Yeah.
But I chose to do it in compositing because now I have control over it and just control the strength in afterwards without having to render it again.
Yeah, to get more freedom.
Always
control.
I also added some depth of field in compositing, which I wouldn't do today. Today I would just render the depth of field in Blender because the depth of field you do in compositing just doesn't look that good.
Okay, Blender does the job very well.
Yeah, then I put another layer of dust on top of this book. On top of that. Then I resized it to 4K, this whole thing. I put a little bit of lens distortion to match the lens distortion of the real footage. A little bit of chromatic aberration here, it's very subtle.
To make the shot believable. Yeah,
so
like shot from the camera, from a real camera. It doesn't look that clear.
And then I put some color correction to adjust the background to look like the foreground image of the real footage, because we have more and more information in the EXR files than correcting this green screen footage to the renders. Here is the light wrap a little bit more visible. So I used this as a background, so I put her on top of this image now. And then I would use a little bit of light wrap, and I put this tentacle in front of it, and that's because why I rendered as a separate layer. Also put the same effects like lens distort and the defocus and the chromatic aberration. Also did a little bit of color correction on this one, and put this one on top of her. And then I also added a layer of dust behind this tentacle and a layer of dust after it. So there is one layer behind the tentacle and a layer of dust before the tentacle, which gives it this depth.
Yeah, it's much more room inside those scenes.
And then I put the books on top of that, and also with the wood splinters, is this a word? I don't know. And then one final layer of dust on top of that, and then it runs into the media out and the composition is done. And this is this whole node tree here.
Yeah, this is some cool tips for making the your creation believable. This is very nice. Compositing makes such a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Compositing is very important, also for 3D artists. Let's go through this color grading here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting part of compositing.
Yeah, also just color grading, putting color grading on top of your composition also adds a lot of realism, because that's the final step where you are treating your foreground elements you shot for real and the background green screen stuff and 3D renders. You're treating that basically as one footage, so that's also adds a lot of realism. So let me turn off everything. So the first thing I did was add some contrast, and then you can see that there is quite a lot of blown out highlights in here. So I used these HDRI wheels here that are basically just controlling the highlights, and brought back some details in here.
Yeah, cool.
And then I added another node after that and added some saturation to this shot. And
yeah, the color gets back.
And then what I did here on the next step is I basically tinted everything slightly greenish, or brought it into this yellow realm. And then I put the skin on top of that. So I basically took a key of the skin, so I only affected this one, and can see that I pushed it more towards this
the yellow
towards
section.
the skin tones.
Yeah.
You can see in the vector scopes. Let's select the vector scope and turn on the skin tone indicator. Yeah, and I push this more towards the skin tones and adjusted them. You can see what difference the skin tones here make. So yeah, this is mixed on top of the other one, so the background layer didn't have any effect on the skin tones.
Oh,
you can see.
Oh, this is this is strange.
And then I basically used this color warper and kind of adjusted these blue tones in her clothes. And then I added a little bit of sharpening to everything and added some mid detail. Yeah, and then I put a vignette on top of everything, where I'm just darkening the edges around her, and I put a radial blur on the edges to get this kind of surreal quality.
Okay. To bring the view back to her face.
Yeah, and focusing everything on the face, because the eye is always drawn to the brightest thing. So I always use vignettes to make everything else a little bit darker. Yeah, and then on top of that I added a soft glow effect. And it does quite a lot on this shot here. It's basically just a glow effect, but using instead the normal or add the soft light effect, and this kind of creates this really gentle contrast without overexposing or crushing the detail. So I often use this glow soft light effect to create this soft creamy look. And here's what it looks with and without it.
Yeah,
and
then really cinematic.
And then just putting a film grain effect on top of everything. So So yeah, that's basically one shot for fishing. If you want to support and gain more insights into my future short film projects, you can join the Patreon. I'm also working on a more detailed tutorial about this shot here, where I will go through this whole process step by step and do it a little bit more beginner friendly.